What happens when a teenage girl stands between a bulldozer and a wounded elephant mother? She didn't scream, didn't run, but what the elephant did next left the entire construction crew frozen in place. And the reason behind it? You won't believe who she was really protecting. You ever wash an elephant with a garden bucket, a dish sponge, and about 3 words of trust between you? I have. And I'll tell you straight. It's not something you plan. It's something that just happens. Like slipping on oil in your garage, except the oil has tusks and weighs 4 tons. Her name was Mataji. I didn't name her. Some old mahout did years ago, before the reserve dried up and the state decided elephants weren't as profitable as asphalt. I'm 17, by the way. My name's Leah. I live in a dusty patch of Georgia where folks think climate change is a liberal fairy tale and bulldozers are more reliable than facts. My dad's a field biologist. I guess that makes me the tree hugger's kid to the construction crew that moved in last week. Anyway, that morning was hot, the kind of hot that makes birds walk instead of fly. I'd biked out to the edge of the forest with a backpack full of oats, clean water, and a tiny bar of handmade soap. Mataji was waiting by the dry creek bed. She always waited. She didn't move much when I got there, just swayed a little, like she was trying to remember how it felt to be calm. Her skin looked worse than usual, cracked, gray, dry like sun-baked clay. But when I poured the water in the basin and started scrubbing behind her ear, she leaned in like she trusted me. And then the rumbling started. Now I've heard tractors, I've heard storms, I've even heard the sound of 100 deer scattering at once. But this sounded like the earth itself had a hangover and was stomping around looking for coffee. The trees shook, birds bolted. Mataji suddenly lifted her head and gave this deep, thunderous huff. Not a trumpet. Not yet. But the kind of warning you only ignore if you have a death wish or a contract. The bulldozer came through the woods like it owned the place. Behind it, 6 guys in hard hats and neon vests. One of them had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth like he was born that way. That was Jim Maddox, local foreman, and a royal pain in the forests behind. "Hey, kid!" he barked, like I was a stray dog. "This ain't a petting zoo. Get out of the way. We're cutting a path through here." I wiped mud off my arm and stared at him. Stared. I'd seen him in town, ranting at grocery clerks and spitting about freedom every time someone told him to recycle. "You're cutting through the reserve," I said. "Not anymore. New state order. This land's been reclassified." "You want trees? Go hug 'em somewhere else?" I looked at Mataji. She didn't move. Not yet. But her eyes were locked on the machine like it was something she recognized and hated. I stepped between her and the bulldozer, heart pounding like a bass drum. My voice cracked, but I shouted anyway, "There's wildlife here. This is her home." Jim laughed. Not kindly. "Then she can move." That's when the bulldozer engine revved, and I swear to you I could feel it in my bones. Dust flew, Mataji bellowed, but before I could process anything, she lunged. I didn't move. Couldn't. Next thing I knew, her trunk hit me like a padded sledgehammer. Not enough to hurt, just enough to knock me off my feet and flat onto the dirt. And then she charged, straight toward the bulldozer. It all happened fast. The workers panicked. One dropped his radio. Another stumbled back into a bush. The driver slammed on the brakes and reversed so hard the machine nearly tipped. Mataji didn't follow. She just stood there, trunk high, daring anyone to come closer. And that's when I saw it. Just past her legs, half hidden in a bush under a torn tarp and a pile of dead branches. A baby elephant, small, shivering, barely moving. And in that moment, everything clicked. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this unfolds. Trust me, it only gets wilder from here. So there I was, flat on my back in the dirt, heart racing, arms scraped, and trying to wrap my head around the fact that an elephant just saved my life. And not just any elephant. Mataji, the same silent giant I'd been bringing oats and hose water to for the last 4 months. And suddenly I understood why she'd been so twitchy lately, why she'd started hovering near the creek bed again, why she'd shoved me out of the way like I was nothing more than a rubber cone on a highway. She wasn't just guarding territory, she was protecting her kid. And this, all of this, was about to get way uglier than I thought. Because Jim Maddox and his squad of human wrecking balls weren't just here to clear a path. They were here to level everything. Babies, mothers, history, didn't matter. If it stood between them and their paycheck, it was coming down. Jim stormed toward me like a man who's used to getting his way by barking louder than everyone else in the room. "You trying to get yourself killed, little Miss Activist?" He grabbed my arm. Not hard, but tight enough to remind me that in his world, might made right. "Let me go," I snapped. "Nah, you don't get to cry foul and play hero in the same breath. This is work, girl, state-funded, fully permitted. You think your little animal rescue mission means something? These machines run on signatures, not sympathy." I could smell his cologne, the kind of scent that tries to say I'm important, but mostly smells like panic and overcompensation. Mataji took a step forward, just one, and the ground responded like it noticed. Jim looked up, his grip loosened. "Call the sheriff," one of the crew said, nervously glancing between the elephant and me. "No," said another guy, the youngest of them, with sunburned cheeks and eyes that darted like trapped rabbits. "Don't call anyone yet. Let's figure this out." But Jim had already grabbed his walkie and started barking code into it. Backup, trucks, chainsaws. He didn't care what he was calling in, just that it sounded official. I backed up, shielding the calf with my arms, like that would stop a bulldozer. Mataji pressed in behind me, wrapping her trunk partly around her baby's side. She was trembling, not from fear, but from restraint. Like if she took one more step, someone wouldn't be walking home tonight. Then, just when it felt like the air couldn't get any tighter, a truck skidded to a halt on the dirt road behind us. Out came my dad, Thomas, boots still muddy from field work, shirt half-buttoned, camera slung around his neck like a badge, and behind him, a local reporter and her cameraman, both moving fast, smelling a story. Jim went stiff. "Tom, this isn't your property anymore," he barked. Dad didn't flinch. "But it's still under federal wildlife protection," he said, waving a folder in his hand like a sword. "Section 32C, endangered habitat, and you just drove a bulldozer across it with an unregistered crew and no environmental clearance. That law's been buried for years. You're about to find out it hasn't." The reporter was already filming. The camera caught everything, the machines, the tension, the baby elephant barely visible behind me. Even Mataji, standing tall like she knew she was being recorded, and finally had an audience. Jim sputtered. "You want a circus? Fine. But when that elephant snaps and someone gets trampled, you explain it to the lawyers." He turned to his crew. "Bring the chains. Separate the big one. Move in slow." "Don't you dare!" I shouted. "She's not attacking. She's protecting, like any decent parent would." But they were already circling us. Men with ropes and chains trying to corner a wild animal that had done nothing but shield her child. And me? I stood my ground, because if Mataji could do it, barefoot, tusked, and traumatized, then so could I. This is the climax. Everything you've waited for, it's happening now. Stick around to see how the fight for justice really goes down. Let me tell you something about elephants. They don't bluff. If a 4-ton mother with cracked tusks and a trembling calf behind her decides you're the problem, you've got 2 options. Leave or get educated real quick about the laws of physics. And yet, there they were. Grown men with shiny hard hats and trembling clipboards, tightening chains like they were wrangling some barnyard cow. Newsflash. You don't lasso a mother who's already lost once and live to tell about it. Mataji stood still. Her ears were out, trunk low, like she was giving them one last chance to make a smart decision. Spoiler, they didn't. One guy stepped forward with a chain. Another circled around the baby. And me? I stood smack between them, arms stretched wide like some kind of human stop sign. My legs shook. The crew scattered. One tripped and landed flat. Another dropped the chain and ran. Even Jim Maddox stumbled back, bumping into his own bulldozer like it might defend him. But Mataji didn't charge. She just stood there, towering between her calf and the machines, her giant feet planted like anchors, eyes burning holes through every man who thought this forest belonged to them. Cameras were rolling. The reporter whispered, "Keep it steady," like she knew this footage was going to hit national news by sundown. And in that moment, under Georgia's blistering sun, in a clearing that had no business being paved, I realized this wasn't just about one elephant. This was about the whole system. The way we pave over what we don't understand. The way we measure value by price tags, not life. The way people like Jim walk through the world thinking consequences are for other people. Well, not today. My dad stepped forward and raised a document like it was a flag. "This injunction is signed," he said, "and effective immediately. All construction on this land is suspended. Any further activity will be considered illegal encroachment and obstruction of a federal investigation." Jim's face turned a shade of red I didn't think skin could produce. "This isn't over," he growled. "You're right," I said. "It's just beginning." And then, poetic timing, the sheriff's truck pulled up. Guess the camera crew sent out that footage a few minutes earlier. Guess the whole town had time to tune in and watch the girl with the elephant stand up to a bulldozer brigade. Officers stepped out. One took Jim aside, another checked the baby elephant, still curled under his mother's belly like a secret the world wasn't supposed to find. And Mataji? She finally relaxed. Her shoulders eased, her trunk lowered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she blinked slowly, like she could finally afford to. We stayed like that for a while, me, covered in sweat and dirt, standing beside the world's most patient animal, while the law caught up to justice. Days later, headlines ran everywhere. Teen stands between bulldozer and baby elephant and wins. Elephant defends her calf. Community defends the elephant. Daughter of conservationist sparks statewide wildlife policy review. But none of those headlines mentioned the look Mataji gave me when it was all over, or how her calf nuzzled her side, safe for the first time in weeks, or how I, Leah Ann Carter, finally stopped feeling like just the weird kid with the camera phone and a rescue complex, because in that clearing, I found something bigger than myself. Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's dusty, bruised, and standing between chains and silence. And sometimes it has tusks.